Hello, everyone, and welcome to What Makes a Good Game. So, my name is Chris Luchs, and I will be the moderator for tonight. We have plenty of guests here to go ahead and talk about what they're doing, and about different questions and different things to recap on the James V. lecture from last week. So, first thing I'm going to do is switch over to the slides so you guys can see those, and then we'll go through introductions. So, again, this presentation is brought to you by the Games and Simulations Network from ISTE. And with us tonight, again, we have myself, Chris Luchs. We also have Russell Brandon.
Howdy.
He's waving down there. We also have Vasili Giannoutsos, or otherwise known as Blue.
Hey there.
And then next up, we have Hubert Huang.
Hello.
And then we have Tanya Martin.
Hi.
And we have with us our camera person and all-around go-to person, Kay Novak. And we have John Spike.
Hello.
And we have Kristina Thoennes.
Hello, hello.
And we have Leanne.
Hello.
Well, thank you all for joining us. So first thing I do is we're going to give a recap of the of Jim G's talk, and to do that, we'll have John talk about some pieces of it, and then we'll also have Russell sort of wrap up the recap. So go ahead, Jonathan.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Chris. The Jim G talk covered a lot of different terminology and things to think about when utilizing games and game-based learning. One thing that he talked about was the value of experiences, and so experiences in certain ways are something that we use for all our future learning and something that we kind of draw upon, but the only experiences that matter are things that we feel like we can utilize and implement in our future learning experiences, kind of like we talked about. And he talked about, I just gotta get mine pulled up here. He talked about experiences that are good for learning, and 4 phases kind of take place when students or any learner is trying to go through and have a valuable experience. One is that they have a lucid goal, and so to kind of understand this, I'll use an example of kind of a game that we'll be talking about during this session, Minecraft. One of your lucid goals during Minecraft might be to survive in survival mode. So that is something that they all see as a purpose, maybe to help each other survive. The second thing with a good experience that is good for learning is that the learner has some sort of action to take or a decision that they need to make. And so in a game like Minecraft, for example, the learner might need to decide what kind of things to do, like are they going to go out and gather food? Are they going to build a home to be safe for the night? So they have these actions to take. And then the third piece that goes along with that second is the action matters in a good experience that is good for learning. So the action has some sort of repercussion depending on what they choose to do. So if the person decides to go and build their home but they don't get food, they might be kind of struggling to survive. If they gather food and then night comes and they're not protected, they might be out of luck in that regard. And then the final piece is that the learner is helped to manage the attention in a good for learning experience. So for example, somebody maybe contextualizes the situation for the learner. Perhaps a teacher could be the person who plays this role. So they might come in and say, looking at this experience, what do you take away from this experience and this action, this decision that you made? One example that I can give is my students realized one of the actions they took was gathering wood, but they did not do anything after they gathered all the wood on the map. And they asked me to spawn more wood in Minecraft, and I said, well, what else could we do here? I mean, what else could we do to, help wrap ourselves around this and make this experience valuable for our next time out in the game? They realized they had to conserve. They had to plant more trees instead of just harvest them all without doing anything. So educators can be kind of that managers of the attention economy. What is it? How do we make these experiences meaningful for future learning experiences? So that's a little bit about good for learning experience, and I'll turn it over to Russell to talk about kind of 2 different types of gaming experiences.
All right. So one of the big things that G addressed was kind of this how how we experience games. And the two things that he focused on were this kind of more simplistic classic games perspective and the good for learner games, GFL games, and and kind of this idea that there's this tacit knowledge component that really influences the amount of and the type of information that you're trying to convey to the learner. So the examples that he made were basically taking a formula, something like Tetris, Metal Gear Solid, Civilization, and you take a really basic game mechanic for a classic game like manipulating blocks, or say a stealth mechanic, or even just build and expand your city. And with that, you have you add onto that a content level, which is locking down blocks in Tetris, or infiltrating in Metal Gear Solid, or even creating a civilization with Civilization. And the goal for that is this basic, it's mastery of those mechanics. Mastery of manipulating blocks, mastery of stealth, and mastery of building. But if we take that to another level, to this idea of tacit knowledge, so the idea that there are things that we can know that we don't know how to teach people, we get into this idea of affective, effective games. So the idea that we have an emotion, like something in Gone Home, actually exploring a person's life. So in Gone Home, the mechanic is to basically explore a home, and then the content is that you're actually exploring a life. And the goal of this game is not so much mastery, but is actually having an empathic experience where you're empathizing with the character that you're exploring their home. Same deal with Flower, or even with something like Dragon Box, that isn't so focused on just taking students through formulaic mastery of algebra, but the goal is to appreciate it. So to actually have a shift or an addition of some sort of appreciative capacity for the learner. So, and granted, this can happen in both circumstances. So if a person has some sort of appreciative capacity change in Metal Gear Solid, that's certainly something that can occur. But in something designed like a classic game, the focus is on mastery of that basic mechanic. Whereas big distinction, and the thing that G is really calling for us to do is to acknowledge these good for learning games, is to say, well, we need to shoot for this affective mastery, this affective shift in the learner.
And Russell, I just brought up here because you mentioned it, Dragon Box. And this was mentioned by a lot of people at the webinar and saying that they loved it. And when you're reading this here, it says, secretly teaches algebra to children. You wish you had it when you were young. Learner-centric, voted best series games. And I see what you really mean by effective, that this is really looking at how you can change people's ideas about that. And their claim is after 1 hour.
Yeah.
I'm
very stout claim.
I'm going to switch screens really quickly. But as compared to another one that I just happen to have up, World of Warcraft, but I happen to be in a Draenor place. And the Draenor, and they're the underdogs. They're the people who are getting, these are the people who are getting displaced. So two different games that I think are, both of them are trying to make the same kind of appeal.
Exactly that. And one of the big distinctions, at least I've seen, and that's why I like that he put Dragon Box on that list, is that compared to a lot of other math or game-based learning environments, Dragon Box actually really does do a good job of impacting the learner, at least, at elementary level from what I've seen. While there are still other programs that try for that, Dragon Box does a really good job of kind of getting kids to say, oh man, I know I'm doing math, but math is also fun.
Speaking of math is fun, Kristina, do you want to talk a little bit about what you're showing on your screen?
Sure. I was just in the Hangout a couple weeks ago about, or watching about Bootstrap World, which is what I'm showing on my screen. And I haven't used this yet, but it sounds great because the kids are designing their own game, but they're using algebra to do the coding for it. And so they end up having like a real reason why they need skills in algebra. So I was thinking that it helps them develop that mastery, but also an attitude or an appreciation for algebra too. And I haven't tried it yet, but it seemed like it fit into this whole conversation of mastery and appreciation and that affective part of it.
It sounds
Definitely.
like that's giving a relevance to it.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, we're going to go ahead and move into the next portion of our presentation, and it's everyone's favorite. It's Q&A. So we're going to start off with question number 1. Are all our contestants ready?
Ready, Chris.
Yes, all right. So first question, how do you know when a game is chocolate-covered broccoli? Everyone's pondering.
Well, I really loved the way that James G. described it last week, which was that chocolate-covered broccoli is when you have a game where the mechanic of the game doesn't fit the content. So I'm thinking of a game that my students have been using through Digital Passport. This is a digital citizenship game where they're having to make decisions about what kind of information to share online. But the mechanic of the game is just bouncing on these trampolines going up, and it's a fun game, but the mechanic of it doesn't exactly fit the content of what we're trying to learn. It might make more sense if that game was designed as a maze, where they're trying to work their way through a maze of choices about what information to share online or not.
And I see some people saying blah. So I guess what you're saying, Kristina, is that the chocolate doesn't quite fit. So the chocolate and broccoli don't fit together. So it's not like the action that they're taking has anything to do with making the learning portion fun, right?
Right.
I think it's kind of like the easy way to do it. It's a game, and so it has appeal. First of all, they call it a game, and it maybe a lot of flashy colors and sounds and that kind of thing. And the thing that comes to mind for me as somebody from the K-12 sector is the typical either a math game or a response ABCD where something is shooting at the screen and you've got the answer. And it's kind of like, it makes me think of, if you can Google it, it's not a good question. So what that the kid can, answer some silly question and blow up a rocket ship as a result of it. It really isn't learned, like with the Dragon Box and the Bootstrap. There's actually function to learning the mathematics. There's a reason to learn it. Something happens as a result of it. Besides, you just hit a button and something blows up.
Yeah, I think if you could share my screen real quick, for me it's always a really fuzzy line, because you can have really, share the screen for the computer that I've got, because I'm on a phone on my phase one. I'll share it. Sorry. Breaking all the rules.
And yeah.
If anybody has anything else to say, just get me. No.
Okay. Well, what I was gonna say is, the chocolate and broccoli thing. So sometimes, it's great when things are fun, but at the same time, I can tell you, I've had students play Darfur is Dying, and that is not a fun game. It definitely affects their attitudes, and they find out real quickly there's no way to win, which then becomes a wonderful discussion about exactly what's happening with the refugees. But at the same time, it didn't try. It didn't try to put, if the game was the broccoli or the learning, it didn't try pouring any chocolate over it. It was more than happy to allow the game to have students play it or anyone else play it, and and just affect them by the frustration that happens. There's another game out there called ICE, and it's about deportation. It's another game you don't win, no matter what you do. You see how long you can stay away from being deported, but you don't end up winning. So, who wants to go next? Do I know whose screen to go on to?
Is my screen shared now, or okay, sorry.
Okay, Russell, I think it is, and then we'll go to John.
Okay. So for me, it becomes a really fuzzy situation because a lot of conversations I had when we were developing tutoring systems with games in them is basically, I mean, we would use chocolate-covered broccoli, but we would say, how can we put chocolate on our broccoli? Is like, how can we make this experience suck less? Was always the conversation we would have.
Interesting conversation.
Well, I mean, because we weren't, I mean, and one of the things I remember James G. saying at a talk was like, well, I mean, if you're going to be a game designer, be a game designer. Don't just go into that with that mentality. And I think so, like iCivics, so this game that I've seen several of my social studies teachers use is a great example of, I mean, it's in kind of the realm of chocolate-covered broccoli in the sense of you have this interactive space and you have kind of this diner dash feel to it. And as you're going along, you're learning more about, like, do you have a right for different things, and you have to maintain relationships with your partner. Whereas if you go to something like Democracy 3, I mean, this is a game that's made for enjoyment. I mean, the idea is not that this is supposed to be educational. The idea is that you're simulating a government, but they do it in a way that, I mean, makes it approachable and it provides that experiential component in the sense that it's really hard to be successful. And you see how many different things are, like, I mean, this is just the beginning in terms of setting up what your country looks like. And, I mean, you get to influence some things directly, and then you have to recognize that you can't influence them directly. It's a spectacular game for anyone who hasn't played it. I'd recommend it. Very unforgiving. I get assassinated all the time because I don't let the right people make the right people happy. And so I think this is a good example of, I mean, the game designers went out to say, we want this to be an experience. We want people to know that running a government is really, really hard. Whereas iCivics is more about learning about those small components, about rights, about constitutional law. And in that case, I mean, I'm not going to fault iCivics because even though they're kind of putting a little chocolate on their broccoli, I mean, maybe that makes it a little bit easier to swallow.
All right. So next up is Jonathan. Jonathan, you've pulled up a screen share as well.
Yeah. Just hopefully it's going full screen right now. I'm hoping something like that.
We can see it now. Yep.
All right. Beautiful. Okay. So just one way that I try to explain this when I'm trying to talk about GBL with some of my staff is you've got some games that do the chocolate-covered broccoli really well, but it's not getting quite to that level of analyzing, evaluating that we want our students to do. And I give the example as I love Sumdog. It's a great chocolate-covered broccoli program. The one that I've got on the left of the hand side of the screen here is, I mean, they're practicing their math facts and skills and things like that, and then they go and they stack garbage. But you get that Jim G issue where because you answered a math problem right, you suddenly get to stack garbage and you want the highest garbage stack out of the players you're playing. It's not quite. There's not a match there. That experience of doing math won't transfer to that skill of stacking garbage. Although stacking garbage, I think we can all agree, is an important skill. Whereas you've got experiential learning and you've got affective, effective learning that G talks a little bit about with a game like Spent, where you live 30 days in the life of someone trying to survive in an impoverished family. And you've got something that sticks with students, and Kay kind of touched upon this. It sticks with them because it's not enjoyable. It feels real for many of them. So a little bit of different world between Sumdog and Spent in terms of experiencing something versus doing a task and drill and kill and then transferring it to something fun that the kids enjoy, like stacking cows on top of mattresses. So that's kind of how I try to help people wrap their heads around it in my district.
Very cool. And I think that's one of the things you're looking at is it's kind of funny because with chocolate covered broccoli you look at it and sometimes it's one of those things where you know it when you see it, or you know it when you taste it. So I'm looking at some of the comments of some of our a little bit shyer discussants. And Blue, you talk a little bit about Terra Online. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I'll bring that up. Terra Online, which has become Terra Rising, which is now free to play. It's a massively moving online role-playing game, so MMO, and it has built in this functionality of guilds becoming like political leaders, so they start controlling different areas of the map, so it actually affects the prices of things. So they get money, they run it, and depending on how well they run it, they can bring in really rare and exclusive traders to bring in those really epic items that are hard to get. So politics in game isn't a hard or something that's new. It's just trying to find the right way to do it right.
Well, exactly. I think I've seen that a lot, and also like EVE Online. There's also a lot of political shenanigans that go on there, and a lot of campaigning that goes on in EVE Online as well as Terra. So definitely you see a lot of these larger MMORPGs that have a lot of people, have a lot of interaction, and it's kind of funny to see how people react whenever you have the designated troll. Someone who is just totally going after them for just for the sake of going after them. It's kind of interesting when they're campaigning. So moving right along to our next question. Question number 2: how can teaching as a game designer or coach enhance learning? So who would like to go first?
I'll start with the justification for Gabe Newell on that slide. And unfortunately, I don't have it to screen share because I don't have it installed on this computer. But for anyone who's played any of Valve's games, it's really interesting. You can extract a lot of basic learning theory from how they design their games. But the thing that really just gets me so pumped about it is that they know that when they're designing a game, they know that they're not just interacting with a player, but they're interacting with a learner. And one of the best examples, if you haven't gotten it, go out, check it out. It's great, is Half-Life 2 Episode 1, because there's a commentary section and lets you get into the heads of these designers, and you realize it's like, oh, wait, maybe thinking like a game designer isn't so far off from thinking like a teacher, because they're trying to create experiences where they model behavior, they model a puzzle, and then they scaffold that puzzle or that mechanic. So it's like they say, we're going to give you this power. Then they say, we'll give you this power with some support, and then go crazy, and then have fun and explore with it. And I think one of the biggest benefits to thinking like a game designer in that way is that a lot of teachers have trouble getting past that scaffolding phase and saying, not just, okay, we've given you a power, now we use that, or we've given you a basic skill, now we're just going to use that basic skill to learn another skill. Instead, what about saying, okay, we've given you the skill, now, hey, don't all the math manipulatives that we have accessible for you, don't they look different now? Like, can't you go out and play with those and see what sort of new things you can do with your power? And so that's one of the big shifts that I had, at least in terms of thinking about how game designers think. It's like, wow, teachers, I mean, just thinking about that idea of when you teach a student something, that you've essentially given them a new power. Someone brought up something about leveling up in a conversation before here, progression, and the idea that, I mean, as we're learning in class, that's a progression. We're acquiring new skills, and so giving students the the wherewithal to take that skill and like go party with it, have fun with it, but in a classroom so we can watch it and make sure that you're doing it correctly, right?
So I'll jump in unless somebody has something. You know, learning should be joyful. It should be intrinsically motivated. And we've gone through about a decade of having it be extrinsically motivated and not so pleasant. And I think by thinking of ourselves as how do game designers do this? How do they get people to spend hours and hours and hours running around picking flowers or whatever it is in a game? That it can help us reimagine what we should be aiming at for how kids can come into our classroom and be excited and eager to learn every day.
And I think Tanya brought something up. I believe this is one of her blog posts. And I also believe Tanya's blog was in the Virtual Education Journal was for the second year running voted Reader's Choice for 2014. So Tanya, would you like to say anything?
Well, you know, the whole idea of, I think, is the teachers, the world has changed, and the teacher of the past was the holder of the knowledge, and so the holder of the knowledge would, bring people together and tell them their, wise and wonderful things, and that was what learning used to be like, and it probably worked at some point. But things have changed, and the world is out there. So I think you still need a teacher. You still need that guidance. And I think that the teacher as a game designer is providing that environment. And the game doesn't have to be online. The game can be any kind of a game. Actually, kids can invent their games. But you're providing an environment in which kids can sort of invent and get those resources out there and kind of figure it out. So I kind of like to think of it as, kind of being sort of like the puppeteer, a little bit of an ARG thing, that you're in the background kind of setting it all up and letting the kids kind of figure it out, where you're just giving them the environment in which to do this learning. But it just can't be a free-for-all. So you kind of have to have an end in mind, or a sort of end in mind, and when they go off, you have to be able to bring them back, and you manage kids, and younger kids, of course, can get hurt and get into trouble and hurt each other and all that kind of stuff. So you do have to be there for that kind of a thing, but just sort of manage the environment and have the goal in mind, and then kind of let them go and watch them, and depending on the design of this game or learning experience.
So what you're saying is a more knowledgeable other or a guide on the side?
Yes, the more knowledgeable other, which I frequently need, I have to say.
And I'm just going to jump in real quick because you guys are just playing it perfectly. I guess what I wanted to say is that I went into an anthropology class, and I'm at a community college, so our semesters are a little different. We have to do things really, really quickly a lot of the time. But these students are going to be presenting a movie to the public, and they get to invite 64 people. And they wanted to design a game that their audience can play while they watch the movie, and then they're going to have an hour to see if their movie had an effect on people. And it is about diametrically opposing ideas based on religion. Yes, well, that's 64, and it's because the number of tables. We have 8 tables of 8. Okay, so. So they're going to play it. But I went in, and Russell just said objectives are key. I walked in with our information and technology literacy objectives that were just approved at our college and said, okay, this is what you have to assess people on before, while they're playing that game. And you have to figure that out, and you have to do it in the game. And they just went crazy, and they're having so much fun in developing it. It's going to be April 2nd, but it's really funny because I go to faculty meetings, with the same rubric on information and technology literacy, I talk to the faculty and they go, wow, let's do an annotated bibliography. Wouldn't that be good? We can assess with an annotated bibliography. And then I went to a second faculty group and they go, oh, let's make our annotated bibliography. Let's make it on steroids. And the difference between what the students are planning on doing, which we're going to send people on. We don't have time to do a full alternate reality game, but they are so sending people on basically, you know, a intellectual scavenger hunt. And they're working on which ones are the false ones and which are the positive ones. But I don't want to take up too much time. But really, the difference between giving it to somebody who's thinking more traditional, let's do annotated bibliographies, versus a bunch of students in it's the name of the course is Cultural Anthropology and Religion, and the difference between the students and how they want to do it. So I will let that go. And Twitch TV, if we get a channel set up, sure, we can put it out.
And I think that's another thing. I mean, for me, what I like doing is when I put on my game designer hat, and even as I'm looking at my students as coaches in my classes, I teach accounting, and of course that's the most exciting class ever. And the fun thing about it is that really what's fun for me is as an instructor is how do you design barriers to learning, because we're so used to just sort of trying to help the students access information as quickly as possible. Well, the thing is whenever we're in career and technical education, our goal is not only to let them learn the academic side of things, but we also have to go ahead and basically teach them the technical side of things. And as we all know, in the real world, things don't easily come for you. They're not just magically in the book for you to find. And so what's fun for designing these games and designing and using game design as a teaching tool is you basically get to learn what level of barriers do you need to put in. And typically I take the same approach that most games do. You start off with easy barriers, things the students can go over. They can crawl over, they can go around it, they can easily step over it. And then what happens is the barrier comes up, becomes bigger and bigger. And yes, misconceptions, yes. Giving them misinformation is also fun because you got to verify your sources, because when you start looking at something like accounting, there is a very rigorous and a very clear guideline of what is good and what is correct and what is not correct when it comes to what the IRS wants you to do and doesn't want you to do. So it's an interesting way to go ahead and take an approach in your class where you get the students to really start looking at it and trying to solve these puzzles and looking at seeing what's going on there. So that's one of the things that I love about how I've brought in games into my course is really bringing in that game design idea and also playing the coach, where it's not my job to really sort of tell them what to do. My job is to observe and be extra eyes and ears for them and say, well, have you thought about this? Well, what about, have you checked this regulation? Or have you checked this law? Different things like that. So it's one of those fun things that you can definitely apply in your class as well, especially once you get a better hang of feeling what the game mechanics are. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to move on to our next question. Question number 3. Why are epistemic frames and affinity groups or spaces important to good games? So who would like to go first?
I could weigh in.
I can start it up again because I added that picture of Civ 3. Unless somebody else wants to contribute. I don't want to be the starter of every slide.
Well, explain this picture then, Russell.
Okay. I put that in there because of an article I read a while ago that was in the proceedings for Game Society and Learning, and basically it was. Am I still up? Yeah. Okay. Sorry. But basically, it was a summary of the development of the the Affinity group for Civ 3, and how you had this group of people that started asking questions about, well, how accurate is civilization to actual history? And then other people said, oh, I don't know. Oh, well, I'm a historian, so I made this modification, and now it's a little bit closer. And you essentially had this massive community of people emerge that they all found each other through this game. But one of the most powerful things that happened as a consequence of that is you had this massive community of people who essentially made a university where they would teach each other how to make more accurate mods. They were diving into information, the minutia about history and how they could better simulate it using this tool. And I mean, Sid Meier, even though he's probably a huge history buff, he probably didn't expect that sort of thing to emerge, that sort of effect of the Affinity group. And so you had this really awesome spiral of enthusiasm occur around this game, and as a consequence of that, you have these massive fans. You have this massive number of fans that are so enthusiastic about this game because of this community that's been built around it.
Thank you. Blue, do you have other comments?
Yeah, building off of the affinity groups, it's really giving that the power to the loaner, so it becomes a peer-to-peer loaning, and that social loaning, that is really hard to find sometimes, especially if we're talking about history or math. Unless you're forced to go to a study group or a tutoring session, it's not like it's going to casually come up in conversation.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And one of the areas I look at, like I said, I teach accounting. I also teach business, and luckily for me, there are a ton of games that provide these epistemic frames and affinity groups. That really the key for me is this is a way where I can actually go ahead and start looking at competencies, start looking at learning objectives, and I can start really sort of tying these to the different games, because what I've noticed is the majority of the games that actually have a live economy, where there actually is buyers and sellers, that the players model the same behavior you see in the marketplace. You have competition. You have people fighting over customers. You have people marketing in a wide variety of channels. So if you think like a large game like World of Warcraft, you have the basic auction house where people can go on and you compete on price alone. Or the other thing you can do is you can go in the trade chat and you can become the sidewalk barker, the boardwalk barker, where you're just calling people in and trying to get people to buy your stuff. So there's lots and lots of different ways you can go ahead and bring that real life experience out of a game, because you can see it. And you can see the interaction, and you can see how they go ahead and the language they're using. There are tons of things like in World of Warcraft where there are gold guides, which is all about making profit, which is basically the fundamental reason why you're in business. So there's lots of these things. They do call it sales. They call it revenue. They call it expenses. They look at how much does it cost to offer this versus that product, and it's kind of interesting to be on some of these different websites out there and see, anybody from like 12-year-olds through grandparents arguing about profit margins off of specific items and haggling over them and saying this is what it's supposed to do, and this is what you should be selling. This is what's selling on my server. So to me, there's lots of great things that you can pull out of these games, especially these epistemic frames and these affinity groups, where they really are modeling best practices, and they're modeling the language, and they're modeling the behavior that the students are just reading about in books. And they can actually go ahead and participate in a very, very safe thing. And the nice thing about it is, in a game, you can start a business for a couple gold that you can always replace. In real life, the average starting business cost is anywhere from $50,000 for a service-based company to over $200,000 for any sort of business that actually has a building or any sort of space needed for it. So I'd rather have them go bankrupt on game gold as opposed to having them go bankrupt in real life.
Hubert just made a point I mean, do you want to speak more to the comment you made in chat about using those affinity groups for peer expert coaching?
Yeah, so what I wanted to add was, so in a lot of good games for learning, so when learners are actively engaged in what they're trying to master in the game, they often go to, so if you think about like Civilization, where they have all these online forums where they might post screenshots of their civilization. They ask for help and ask for advice and get assessments of their own performance and what they can improve in. And we've been talking about in the guild for World of Warcraft using the infographics from the Ask Mr. Robot logs and World of logs to assess performance and see what our ragers can do better. And so it's those affinity spaces where people can get together and post actual data that other people, other experts can assess what they're doing and offer feedback and means of improvement. So not only is it just peer coaching, but it's also reaching out and getting experts to evaluate them as well. And so that's one of the things that we're trying in medical education, where one of the projects I'm working on is using mobile technology to record OR surgeries and then posting that, of course, in a safe space, but having and crowdsourcing experts, so other surgeons, other physicians, other evaluators from all across the country to evaluate the performance of the physicians or residents or learners in these live situations.
I was just thinking also about how affinity spaces definitely have that room for problem solving and analysis that you're talking about, but they also provide spaces for a lot of creativity where people can build on the ideas and themes and characters from a game and create artwork or stories. It's just a lot of room for creativity outside but all around the game too.
I think it's kind of the bottom line is it's sort of a role-playing thing, which comes in very handy when I think say for learning a foreign language, for something like what Hubert was talking about, anything in the medical industry, things that might be dangerous, expensive, and totally unrealistic to be able to teach, you know, in another way, unless you're, you know, lecturing or reading something, and it's just so much more fun to kind of play it. So it's really about, you know, playing that you're something or in some situation. You know, the whole role play is fun. Kids like to do it, and I mean, they from the age of 5, you know, when they use puppets in the classroom and dolls and that kind of. I mean, they got little kitchens and little all kinds of things in the kindergarten room. That's really a game.
Well, exactly. I think that's one of the things you're saying. I think role play is something we've used in education for a really long time. I mean, especially in the business realm, that's why you see a lot of universities will have boardrooms where the idea is, well, if you get the students used to being in the environment, then they're going to perform well when they actually reach that environment, when they reach that in their professional career. So there's a lot of different things that you go ahead and you can really sort of model that behavior and give people, give our students a chance to really step into those roles and have fun with it. You know, looking at some of the comments, and Blue is saying, yes, definitely affinity groups. It gives people a chance to connect through something that they have common or experience together. And he also talks about it being a built-in innate thing for us to imitate. Role play clearly evident in early education. That's why they like the hands-on and the tablets. And I will say, yeah, in CTE there is a lot where they try to do a lot of the hands-on experience. It's always fun when you deal with a first-year welding student and you have to get them to think like a welder, and when they're using a really, really hot torch, and where should they put their hands? You know, and make sure they have their goggles on. There's lots of different things that you're looking at as far as trying to get people to model behavior, thinking about stepping into the role and standing in. One of our community colleges recently received an in-house grant where they were able to purchase a a car painting program, where basically it was a car painting sim for an auto body program. And so instead of having to go through all of the issues that come with using lots of paint, and going ahead and having to deal with ventilation issues and everything else like that, and the trial and error that comes with becoming an expert at just how hard to pull the trigger to make sure that you're getting the right amount of paint on a product. What happened is they had the students dress up in their full overalls and coveralls, or full suit with the respirator on and everything else like that. Had them step into the car bay, and they basically had basically looked like a normal, paint sprayer, and they gave it to them, so it was hooked up to a computer, and it just monitors them and tracked where they were at on the piece of the car part. And as they squeezed the trigger, they basically figured out the rate of paint, and they went ahead and they would go ahead and do their job, and they would get real-time feedback as far as what they were doing in the simulation. So there's lots of different things that you can play around with how games can help you with learning what that ability is, and learning how to step into that role. So our next question we have, question number 4. Looks very World of Warcrafty. Next question is, should games be used as text? What do you guys think?
Yes. But I was just going to give a quick affirmation. Considering, we do a book club where we can find the books and the games. And track 1 of our book club is with Sherry Jones, the game scholar, who teaches us about games as paratext, and to where to go look at the rules and the systems and how to use it for English and rhetoric. And I'll stop with the advertisement there, and I'll let some other people speak.
Yeah, I can speak to this one a little bit too. I'm a former English teacher, and now I work with teachers to use games and to try to read them and try to get what the author, the game creators are really becoming more storytellers. I think we can all vouch for that, for the types of games we play and the narratives that they speak to. One that I've got up here on my screen here, Gone Home, and I credit Paul Darvasi. He kind of pioneered using this as a text in the classroom, and I drew a lot of inspiration from him doing this. But the idea of using Gone Home as a text and actually reading and analyzing it, just pulled up my presentation isn't cooperating with me right now, but actual students writing, reflecting about what they find out about the narrative and the story, and writing about symbols, writing themes that they came across, connections to science fiction, finding allusions, and really a lot of games nowadays, the public is demanding a good story in addition to an addicting game mechanic. They also want to have this story that they'll remember, because there are so many good narratives out there, TV shows, books, tons of different things, fan fiction. So games have to keep up and tell a good story, and we can now use those stories as pieces to analyze and read, and to have that affect that Jim G talked about. So I definitely believe in games as text.
Yeah, gosh, I want to have that information. That's a wonderful example of using game as text. Somebody in my world once said that they could teach reading from the phone book if they had to, but they'd prefer not to. And I think that using games as text is a great opportunity to take the literature and the language that kids love and help them move into more academic tasks and formats. And I just think it's too rich an opportunity to pass up. So I have to share the funny little interview I had with my 25-year-old son this afternoon. And I told him what I was doing, and I said, "So what makes a good game?" And the second thing that he mentioned was good narrative. Now, 5 years ago, when I asked my son and his friends what do you read the backstory? Do you pay attention? It's when I was just getting involved with gaming. And they just laughed at me. They said, no, we just shoot them up. So in the last 5 years, they have matured into understanding the importance and value of having good story and good narrative.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that you're seeing a lot of with looking at how the games have evolved. I mean, Grid, you made a comment about playing games replacing TV. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's probably a better story these days. I don't watch a lot of television, and I know when I go to work, people say to me, "Oh, have you?" I mean, so many of the shows are, with the reality television, that there really isn't that much that is that creative or that compelling of a story. And I think, the few that are, we watch, and the game is a better story these days. And there's so many interesting, fun games that engage a user. And I think if you were to walk into homes today as opposed to, say, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, you're going to find an increase in the playing of games. And I don't know statistically, I'm just guessing from people that I know and talk to, people with young children, people with in between children. They'd rather be playing games than watching TV.
Mm-hmm.
We could
Well,
take
I know for me, yeah, that's the thing. I rarely watch TV anymore. Most of my free time is spent either gaming or doing wonderful presentations like this. It's definitely one of those things that's there.
If I could add, it kind of, I mean, I'm referencing back to the chocolate broccoli conversation. This is a game that I'm screen sharing called Elegy for a Dead World, which, I mean, is very, for me at least, it blurs the lines again, especially considering like this idea of, so you're bringing text into a game, or is the game a text? Because what it does is it engages the gamer, or at least asks the gamer. I'd really like to see y'all's opinions regarding it, because I'm not a writing teacher, but I became really engaged because the goal of the designers is basically for players to run around. I mean, in this case, it gives you a prompt, but to run around and to basically fill in text, as well as write their own freeform things that is nested in a dead world. The whole narrative is the idea that you're writing an elegy for a dead world. And so, I mean, I to be honest, I haven't played it that much, because the times that I do, I'm kind of just like, oh, this feels like I'm writing. But it would be interesting to see if, I mean, even if it is just an assignment, to see what students start to think about, because even though, I mean, it's based on like Lord Byron and older texts as well, but to see if students start off thinking, oh, this is just my DOL, this is just my writing assignment, and then they start to think like, no, well, I get freeform now, and freeform becomes this experience where they're actually writing something that they're really invested in. Yeah, so like games, not much designed games prompt text, but games as text as well, because there's still this background.
So I think one of the basics of teaching writing is that you encourage students to write what they know. And this slide that we're looking at now is a really good example of that. This is from a second grader who is struggling to acquire literacy. He's basically at a beginning first grade level, and he was just afraid of everything, and so we ended up having him write his own texts about Minecraft. And he's been phenomenally successful with being able to share this with his class and share it with his grandparents. He gave copies to his grandparents for Christmas. And I think if we don't include the text of games as part of education that we've really missed relevancy. And I think that the idea that we have to be focused on argumentation, well, yeah, there's argumentation in games too. Who's better, the Horde or the Alliance? It's just what you choose to set up as the topic. You can learn any form, but let kids work from what they care about.
Okay, so the thing that you don't know that's going on is there's this side chat for all of us, and when she asked whether it was Horde or Alliance, immediately there's things popping up on the side saying Horde, Horde, Horde. So people are saying that that's not a relevant question.
Well,
but everything else you said was very relevant.
Right. Well, and yeah, you can set up argumentation between any two characters, any two historical figures, any two points of view. Anytime that you have conflict, there's argumentation involved. So it doesn't have to be about climate change or taxation rates or things that kids just aren't involved with yet. I think one of the problems is that the people trying to design curriculum right now are thinking about what do people consider when they're 25, 30, 40, 45, and it's important to head in that direction, but what we really need to be concerned about is what kids are living in the immediate time and help them acquire skills and strategies to move beyond that. Oh, and I'm seeing some chat on the side that students speaking in game language instead of proper English, and it's all a beginning. When we teach writing, we say you start with just kind of a brain dump, let kids get the stuff out. I've heard of English teachers having kids do their pre-writing in text speak. Like what would you text to your friend to get that started?
Well, exactly.
And it has been demonstrated that those students, they produce more, even if it is, they're texting more. They do end up producing more content, which I think is key in actually evaluating their understanding.
Well, exactly. I mean, there's been plenty of studies that have been out there that look at the use of games as a way to kickstart creative writing classes, where students who traditionally struggle with writing, once you get them to start, they end up writing novels about their characters in different games. They go ahead and they write web pages. They create their own web pages. They create all this backstory and exactly. Leanne typed in fan fiction. Exactly. I mean, and that's what you see a lot is that what's kind of interesting in my area is one of the places I oversee is multimedia graphic design, and a lot of people when Second Life first came out, they're like, this is not bad because this gives students a starting point. They can go into a game like into an environment like Second Life or like Minecraft, where there's some building tools, and they can actually go ahead and get a start and getting used to modeling, doing 3D modeling, as opposed to going into like a really, really strong program like Maya, which is very, very complex. And so it's a way to sort of introduce students to that part when they're still trying to figure out what do they actually want to do. So I mean, those are some different pieces that you see there. Is games are that sort of that catalyst to really sort of kick off, those creative energies, those ideas of coming up with storylines on their own. So do we have any other comments? All right, I think we're going to go ahead and move to our next section, and Kay's going to talk about the resources that are available, as well as some other upcoming events.
Okay, so basically we will go very fast through these because I think we're at the hour already. The resources that we talked about are available Two of those are on top. Dr. Jim G's presentation, which we talked about, and then our favorite literacy professor, Leanne Tysseliing, Gaming for Literacy. She did a wonderful EdWeb webinar. We have that listing there. But to make it easy for you guys, we just made a bit.ly, and it says what makes a game good. And it's to a Google Doc, and anything we talked about today, we'll also throw that up there. So even if it isn't up there tonight, like right now, it'll make its way up there. Okay, so next, real quick, is we will have the Metagame Book Club showing up in March. 2 tracks. Interactive fiction, we will have Sherry Jones back, and she's been sending me some information, and it looks great if you like game studies, if you want to know more about narrative and have debates on narrative in games. This is going to be great. Then you basically have the rest of this crew for the multiplayer classroom by Lee Sheldon. A lot of us will be going in and talking about this on Hangouts and up on the Google Plus site. So keep going, please. And just to let you know, the social media that we show up on, Twitter, that is done by Tanya, so GameSim Network Twitter. We use the hashtag metagame a lot, just because no one else is. And we do have a Flickr site where screenshots from this Google Hangout and anything else we can think of are going to go up there. So I think that's about it.
All right, everyone. Thank you for your participation. Thank you all for watching. And everyone have a good night. It's snowing here in Denver again, so it should be kind of fun to see what happens tomorrow. So everyone have a good night, and thanks for coming. Bye, all.